Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining today. It's great to have everybody in the room and also our participants online. Welcome to our roundtable from Insight to Action, Data Sharing in the Service of Human Rights here at the Peller Wilson in Geneva on the Human Rights Day. So everybody, happy Human Rights Day, December 10th. And with that, I would like to start with a bit of an introduction, what we're here to do and what we're here to discuss. We will have many speakers because it's a roundtable format. We will have speakers here in person as well as online. And before we start, given that it's a kind of a small room, at least for those who are present in person, I would like to give maybe a little bit of kind of tour de table before we start. We open the floor to our speakers and then following with the discussion. So with that, to my right, I would like to start with Giovanna.
Hello, my name is Giovanna Beaulieu, and I'm a senior legal officer with the International Labor Organization, working on data protection and other matters, and happy to be here this afternoon.
Thank you. Mark.
Hi, my name is Mark Schechter. I'm a senior legal officer at UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. Also working on a variety of matters and many of which include data protection issues. And very happy. I want to say thank you to the organizers for putting together this great roundtable and inviting UNHCR and myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. David.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Satola. I'm the chief counsel in the World Bank Legal Department, where, amongst other things, I look over different aspects of data protection, data governance. And again, thank you to Mila and the organizers for inviting us to be here. Thanks.
Diana. Thank you, David.
Good afternoon. My name is Diana Zamora. I am with MasterCard. I'm part of the Global Public Policy team, and I'm the main liaison between MasterCard and some of the UN organizations that are based here in Geneva. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you, Diana. I'll introduce myself. Mila Romanov, Data Protection and Privacy Officer with the Office of High Commission on Human Rights, and I will be moderating our today's session. And I'm passing the floor to Sarah.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Dvidar, and I'm a senior legal officer at the International Organization for Migration, IOM, where I work on everything data related within the legal department, including data protection and privacy. Thank you very much, Mila, for hosting this event.
Good afternoon, everyone in the room and online. My name is Christina Vasala Kokinaiki. I'm a senior legal officer with ITU, the International Telecommunication Union. Within ITU, I'm actually leading the internal data protection and privacy task force that was created to create a policy and an implementation guide within ITU. I'm very happy to be here today. So thank you very much to Mila and OHCHR for organizing this event, for organizing the Rights X Summit, which is the first one, if I'm not mistaken, happening.
That's the first one, and many more to come, hopefully.
Yes, and not only for organizing the summit, but in particular for choosing data sharing, for choosing privacy as one of the topics of the roundtables, because it's something that sometimes is forgotten. So it's great that it got to be included in a roundtable. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Liang.
Nice to meet you. My name is Liang, working for OHCHR, Human Rights Affairs Branch, which support investigation teams within OHCHR. And my role in the Human Rights Affairs Branch is supporting investigating bodies through digital platforms and solutions, and also including data protection. Very nice to meet you.
Thank you, Iliang. And with that, I would like to pass on the floor to our speakers who are joining us today online. And as I see, Caitlin is with us from the International Association of Privacy Professionals. Oh, we cannot hear you. One moment. Nope. And maybe meanwhile, we'll start with yours until we resolve the issue with Caitlin.
Thanks,
Mila.
And can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Mila. And hi, everyone. My name is Jos Berends. I work with the UN Secretariat's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs with our Center for Humanitarian Data, where I lead our work on data responsibility, so the safe, ethical, and effective management of data. Thanks for organizing, Mila, and happy Human Rights Day. And thanks for having us over.
Thank you, Jos. And Caitlin, are we able to hear you now?
Let me try this one. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. My name is Caitlin Fennessy. I'm the Vice President and Chief Knowledge Officer at the IAPP, where we focus on privacy, AI governance, and digital responsibility more broadly. Thanks so much for having me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Caitlin, and thank you, Jos. And I don't see if we have Alex from UNHCR.
Yes, I'm here. Hi, everyone, and happy Human Rights Day. So, Alex Novikov, I'm the Chief Data Protection and Privacy Officer for UNHCR.
Thank you, Alex. Great to have you. And checking in if we also have Maxa from UN OICT.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Masa. I work in the, let's call it the technology department of the UN Secretariat, OICT. And I work in the area of technology and data governance, policy, and strategy. And we've been recently working on some stuff that we'll talk about, and we'll really look forward to hearing from everyone's experience in this room to create something even better together. So thank you, Mila, for organizing, and happy Human Rights Day to everyone.
Thank you. So with that, we will now start our discussion. And before we do so, I would like to say a few words of why we're here today. So as you see, RightsX Summit is the first one, and hopefully of many to come. Data is an essential part for either training AI or analyzing and predicting what and how we can better protect human rights. Data helps us enable human rights. With data, of course, come risks that many of us are aware of. But there are also many unknown risks that come with the rapid development of technologies. Rather than talking about the risks today, and my profession in the data protection field comes with understanding, preventing, and mitigating data protection risks. But today, I would really like to concentrate more on the positive aspects of data, and primarily, how can we do better in collaborating with one another? How can we bring partnerships to strengthen human rights? How can we bring private sector, academia, NGOs, international organizations, and as well as governments to the same table where we can freely and safely exchange, share data for the better in this world? I would like to see data as a tool for us to strengthen human rights protection. And being the data protection and privacy officer for the Office of High Commissioner on Human Rights, thinking of the mechanisms and the tools and the processes that could enable that data sharing is job number one. So we have a room full with experts that have been working in this field for quite a while. I put together this panel on purpose with those that work very hands-on with legal instruments, with the data protection tools in the international public sector, in the private sector, in the field, coming from where everybody gets together, like the International Association of Privacy Professionals that brings all those minds and knowledge together. So with that, I would like to start with one of my colleagues, David Setola from the World Bank, to share a few insights and mainly speak of examples, challenges experienced in the world of data sharing from the legal perspective coming from the World Bank as a financial institution, and maybe also share some of the instruments and mechanisms that can help us strengthen data collaboration. So with that, David, on to you.
Thank you, Mila. So in the next 7 minutes, which I think is what's been allotted to me, I'll try and use the time to walk you through the journey that the World Bank has taken in this area as a way of example. Next slide, please. So a lot of you were probably, a lot of the organizations represented here, I think, were, can you move to the next slide, please?
Here we go.
Anyway, a lot of the organizations represented here were part of an effort in 2016 to develop a common approach within the UN system for treatment of personal data. And what you see here is the result of that effort, which was finally concluded in late 2018, which happened to coincide with the entry into force of GDPR. And at that point, in those days, it was still a little dicey to talk about personal data and protection of personal data. And wow, what a long way we've come in just a few years, because now I think that the kind of debates that we had at the time, we don't really have anymore. We accept that personal data protection is a thing and it's a thing that we need to be paying attention to. But the starting point was rather modest. And we can move to the next slide, please. A few years after that, in 2021, the World Bank published its annual World Development Report focusing on data. And in it, we elaborated a system of enablers and safeguards that would use a rights-based approach to protecting personal data. And this was based at the time on the limited experience that we had post GDPR, post joining the UN principles. And there was still some discussion, even at that point, about how international organizations would treat data or not. But importantly, I think this report set the stage that we would approach personal data protection from a rights-based perspective. Next slide, please. One example that I wanted to give, a very practical example, which started around the same time, was an effort that we jointly undertook with UNHCR, and I've had the privilege of working with Mark and other colleagues at UNHCR in developing a framework agreement in order to address the various data sharing needs that took place with respect to persons of concern. So refugees, migrants, displaced people, persons without nationality, for example. We deliberately undertook this work in order to do a couple things. One was to provide a uniform approach between the many places where both the bank and UNHCR were working to assure that there was a common approach to how personal data was treated. Also to reduce transaction costs, because what we found early on was that in each instance, we were starting from scratch, we were having to negotiate from scratch, and that was a big time consumer when basically we were talking about the same thing at the same time. So we did eventually develop a framework agreement that both institutions still follow that really eases the prospect for reaching agreement. I want to point out, though, in this exercise, and I think it would be useful for the audience here, that even though both UNHCR and the World Bank were both part of the UN principles, we understood what all that meant. We understood how that should work. The mandates of the two institutions with respect to personal data were very different. UNHCR had a protection mandate. The World Bank basically had a compliance mandate, even though it was based on the same principles. So we spent a good amount of time trying to reconcile those different mandates in order that we could be speaking the same language, as it were, in the agreements. Next slide, please. And then I wanted to share with you an initiative that has been going on at the World Bank the past 5 or so, 6 years, which has started out as being called the Data Collaboratives. And it was an effort to ensure that private sector data that the bank was receiving for research was of a similar quality. The terms and conditions of getting that data were all the same, because what we found again was that each company from whom we wanted to get data had a different approach to it. And so we standardized our data sharing agreements, our data licensing agreements, and those are now used across the board. This is a limited number of the entities with whom who are members of this now development data partnership. But the other thing I want to say about this is, at the same time that we were developing these common agreements and the common set of terms, both legal and data quality related, we also established a common repository, which is housed with the World Bank. So all the members, the IGOs, the multilateral development banks, international organizations that are participating in it, all have access to the same data. If they get a data set and they want to contribute it to this collective, they do so on the basis that all the other organizations will have access to it. So again, reducing the actual costs of obtaining data and the transaction costs of obtaining data. Next slide, please. And I think I'll leave it with that and say thank you very much and look forward to the rest of the discussion. And I think I made it in 7 minutes.
Thank you, David. It's great to hear about what the World Bank does. And later on, I would like to elaborate a little bit more on questions related to open data, but I will leave that for afterwards to the discussion. So with that, I would like to pass on the floor to the expert and a colleague from MasterCard, Diana Zamora, who is a Global Public Policy Director and based here in Geneva.
Thank you. Thank you, David. I think I will agree with many things that you just said. Also, I wanted to preparing for this panel, I was thinking, how can we contribute to this conversation? Because yes, we operate a lot of data. Yes, we do have some products that support in humanitarian crisis. But the issue for me was basically humanitarian crises need two things, at least from my point of view, and that's where I found the best place to start. They need to be done in a safe manner. There are many things at risk. Their lives at risk, their resources at risk, but also they need to go, like, there is a sense of urgency, right? Needs to go fast. Things need to move to come to the place or to the final objective really fast. And for those things to actually happen, you need trust. And that's where I found some of the things that I wanted to share with you today, because MasterCard is in the trust business. Basically, we connect cardholders with merchants, and we facilitate these transactions happening. And if we lose anybody's trust, then we lose our business. So I wanted to start from that point of trust. How do you build trust with these two things? Because maybe when you are trying to pay with, or I don't know, digitally for something, and your card doesn't work that time, you might lose trust in using that card again. And that entails, for you to have that trust in using a certain payment system, there are a lot of things happening behind the scenes. And that's what I wanted to share with you today. So just a couple of data for you to have some dimension of how big the challenge is, at least for us. So we have to secure 2 billion cards per year, happening almost 160 billion transactions annually. This means that we need to invest more than 1 billion in cybersecurity tools. And I wanted to start by pinpointing the issue of cybersecurity, because we're talking about digital and data. And for us, cybersecurity needs to come from the beginning. Cybersecurity is not a luxury. And what we have found is that particularly it's within third-party vendors where some of the weakest links are. So maybe we are super secure in the core of our businesses, but we need to do assessments, particularly for third-party vendors, where some of the vulnerabilities might be there. And we tackled this issue because we're talking about data sharing. Well, every time you use your MasterCard abroad, for instance, so if you have a card issued in Switzerland and you pay for a coffee in New York, that is a cross-border data transaction. That is a cross-border data exchange. So all this is happening in a space where it's digital, and that we need to have a three-step approach. So first we assess, then we protect, and then we need to be prepared to respond. So first we quantify our cyber vulnerabilities, and we do it also for different clients in different spaces of the payment system. We also run simulations. So we put some stress in our own systems, and we ask third-party vendors to do the same. Because if one of those third-party vendors fails in these tests, then all of the chain, all of the system could be in danger. And some of the things that we could share with you today is that, of course, we are MasterCard, we're a company, we're operating in more than 200 countries, but something that we see that might be useful is to start with lightweight risk scans. And there are tools out there. I will not name some of the products that we have, but they're very simple products that, let's say, if you are trying to assess the cyber risk of a certain space, you don't need to invade it. You can actually go through, let's say, around the corners, and you'll be able to assess how safe it is or not. And that can be run pretty quickly, not only in your own data, but also in the data that you're going to be sharing. Another thing that has been useful for us is to apply layered defense. So basically on VPNs, dedicated APIs, two-factor authentication. That means when you're trying to pay for something and you receive that SMS asking, "Is that you who just received this $300? Like, is that you?" And you can actually implement those with the organizations and with the individuals who are going to be accessing these data. And finally, I wanted to share a very promissory or very exciting test that we run. So Singapore has one of the most amicable sandboxes for data sharing and data protection. And one of the largest challenges that we face is these data crossing borders, facing some constraints on localization requirements, which means that some countries do not want their data leaving the country. But how do you fight cyber threat attacks or cyber scams, particularly fraud that is usually happening across borders? We have piloted a solution using some kind of encryption. I can give you the details. It's called homomorphic encryption. But basically what it means is that the authorities can ask for a certain IBAN or account number, and to ask if this IBAN has been related to some financial risk or financial behavior. And without sharing that IBAN in this space, we have been able to connect 4 different jurisdictions. So we were able to comply with the 4 different data protection mandates or data localization mandates, and encrypting that data and trying to connect the dots in between one IBAN and the other. And this was used to fight financial crime across borders. And this could be also used because this needs to be done quickly, safely, and in a trusted manner, right? Because false positives, they might be awkward, but you don't want false negatives, right? So those are the things that I wanted to share in the realm of cyber security, data protection, some of the encryption solutions that we are using. And finally, this may sound very obvious, but at least for us, it's at the core of what we do. And this may be, very obvious when I prepare for this, but it's super important to have in mind data standards and at least some kind of interoperability, because we're able to do what we do in this manner because there is some kind of harmonization. And of course, every organization, in our case, every country, sometimes every state would have their own flavor, their own requirements for data protection, for data interoperability. But if there is not at least some base to start with, it is impossible to do this well.
Diana, thank you very much for covering a very large aspect of data sharing, especially within private sector. And thank you for mentioning the cyber risks, which brings a very interesting perspective to this discussion, very unique one. Not always, I have to say, from my experience, brought up in the data protection conversation. So I appreciate that aspect. So with that, I want to move to our next speaker, Sarah Dwidart, who is a senior legal officer at IOM and works in the humanitarian sector, but I will let you speak a little bit more about the area you work in.
Sure, thank you, Milan. Yes, so maybe briefly to talk about the mandate of IOM. So IOM basically supports states to establish and enhance regular pathways for migrants. And the scope of that is quite large. That includes everything from promoting diaspora engagement, assisting in migration governance. We do research, data collection with respect to movement trends and patterns in order to inform decision or evidence-based decision-making and migration policy, also strengthening health systems and general migration diplomacy. So it covers the gamut, as you can see, but maybe I can just talk about two examples of activities that are a huge part of our mandate. And then within those examples, what data sharing does that entail and with whom? So we do registration for the purposes of providing needs-based humanitarian assistance, for example, in the context of camp management. And so what do we mean by humanitarian-based assistance? So healthcare, psychosocial support, non-food items and shelter. It also requires that we do needs assessments. And of course, especially in the context of camp management, this requires interagency collaboration. We work with all our UN partners in this. And it also often involves working with implementing partners, including local NGOs. They may, for example, collect information from our beneficiaries on our behalf, data and the results. So in that context, yes, there is a lot of data sharing, and it's really necessary also in order to prevent what's known as data collection fatigue of beneficiaries. So you're a beneficiary and you have different UN entities coming to you, collecting information to provide different types of humanitarian services. That's resolved by one organization, perhaps a cluster lead, collecting information, registering beneficiaries, providing it to other humanitarian organizations so that they can provide certain assistance. Also, for the purposes of referrals, which we engage in quite often. So, each humanitarian entity has its own distinct mandate to provide certain services, maybe in a specific context. When we're dealing with unaccompanied separated children, we may refer them to UNICEF, or we may refer certain people to UNHCR. So there's that as well. And that often requires pre-planning. Who do you foresee that you will need to share this information with? Another thing that's a huge part of our mandate is movement operations. So this includes what's known as AVRR, Assisted Voluntary Return and Reintegration, as well as resettlement, which we work a lot with UNHCR on that. And this covers, basically, we're involved from pre-departure through movement assistance itself, as well as what's known as reintegration or integration. So pre-departure, we're really supporting migrants when it comes to orientation training or health assessments. We have health clinics and IOM doctors who assist on that. Also, a movement assistant, that's everything from transit to arrival, medical escorts, special needs arrangements for vulnerable migrants. And then finally, when we talk about reintegration in the context of country of origin or integration services, that covers everything from, enhancing labor pathways and ethical recruitment options, basically providing assistance for integration into society. So who do we work with in that context? Obviously, when we're talking about movement, we're talking about basically constant engagement with states. That's the country of departure, transit, country of origin, country of destination, including consular services, embassies. We work with other IOs. I mentioned UNHCR with respect to resettlement, and local NGOs and implementing partners, particularly when it comes to reintegration services, because they're tapped into the local network and they can assist us in providing that assistance to our beneficiaries. In terms of challenges, so when it comes to sharing with international organizations, at least in my experience, my view is that the challenges aren't so much legal as they are operational, in the sense that, so we all have different international organizations. We all have our own legal frameworks. They're similar enough. Also, UN organizations try to align with the UN principles, which I think were already mentioned. And they're generally similar. They also all generally allow for flexibility when it comes to the, it's the humanitarian sector. There's a certain level of flexibility. We're not going to have we're not going to be able to have rules that are as stringent as, for example, DP laws that apply to the commercial sector, but that have adequate or good safeguards. So in terms of when you get down to the nitty-gritty of contract negotiation, it's not really the legal terms that are difficult to negotiate. What's often challenging is that we haven't settled on the operational aspects. So you have the issue of mandate overlap, right? Who's doing what? If you have this cluster, you have you're dealing with let's say camp management. Which UN organization is going to do what? Which in order to provide you with information that you need, what information do you need exactly in order for you to carry out your assistance? So really what's needed is basically solid SOPs before you can even get into a discussion of sharing information, right? The other thing is ensuring that staff understand that it's not just about having a contract in place, right? A contract is one aspect, ensuring the other party has adequate safeguards. And we generally trust each other, at least legally speaking, we trust that the other organization has those safeguards. They're going to use the information in a way that's consistent with humanitarian principles and do no harm. But it's about, the other preconditions. So transparency. Does the beneficiary know that you're going to share the information? How do you deal with the fact that maybe you already collected all the information from them, their registration is complete, but you didn't foresee that you will have to share this information with this other organization to provide assistance? Does that mean you have to revert back to them, which is an operational challenge? So there's these other aspects. And in terms of solutions, I can't stress this enough. I don't think this is a very new or novel thing, but training and templates those are the two main things I see as important solutions that we need to train staff to recognize that, okay, anytime I need to share data, if I am creating an SOP on a working relationship with this organization that requires the sharing of data, I need to know now what the purpose of the transfer is and what we're going to do. And I think also having these framework agreements, a UN to UN agreement with implementing sort of forms where staff can write down what the specified purpose and what the data is that they're going to transfer for each transfer is really important. but I don't want to get into that because I know that Jos is going to talk about that. I actually think the biggest challenges we face, and I won't get into too much detail about this, is sharing with non-IOs, non-international organizations, because they're more legal, less operational, in the sense that you're sharing outside, you're sharing to private actors, NGOs who do not have privileged immunities, so you lose that protection of your data. And they may be compelled by law to provide that information further, let's say, to the authorities. But also, as I had mentioned, we work a lot with governments. And the risk there is that, yes, these governments are engaged with us to provide humanitarian assistance, but do they have other motives for that data? Will they use that data in such a way that is inconsistent with the humanitarian principles and do no harm? Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And I also want to go back to you afterwards, and maybe with the colleagues that are also present here from humanitarian sector, we could also speak a little bit more on the no share categories, if there is such a thing, and if you've given it a thought. So with that, I would like to go to my next speaker, colleague and friend for many years, Christina Vasala-Kokinaki from ITU. Christina, on to you, and maybe elaborate a little bit more on your overall experiences in the data protection area and data sharing.
Thank you very much, Mila. So I work for ITU, as I mentioned earlier, the International Telecommunication Union. It's a relatively small UN agency. So I would like to talk a tiny bit about ITU for those of you that might not be familiar with it, again, very briefly. So ITU is the UN specialized agency working in information communication technology, which nowadays means digital technologies, because all of those areas have been digitalized. The focus of the work is on three specific areas. We have three specific sectors. One has to do with standardization, so developing standards on technologies. A second area of work is around radio communications, so allocating frequencies, radio spectrum, and then also issues having to do with satellite orbits. And then a third area, which is relevant for the panel today as well for this roundtable, is development. So we do work on capacity building, mainly with governments in the areas of technology in general. So this is what ITU does very briefly. ITU developed a data protection policy relatively recently. It was in the end of 2023, might have been the same year, maybe a year later, as the UN Secretariat. And we did use as a basis, as David mentioned earlier, the UN principles of 2018, which were a very helpful tool in order to be able to focus on our own internal policy. Before talking maybe about challenges around data sharing, I do think it is important to, maybe for all of us in the organizations that we're here representing today, maybe take a step back and realize that data sharing, in many cases, is not an option. It's something that is unavoidable. Like, for an organization to function, we have to share data. So it's not about whether we're sharing data or not. In many cases, it's about how do we share data to ensure the protection of such data and the right to privacy and respecting the right to privacy of individuals. No matter what the mandates of our organizations are, and that I saw it very well moving from a humanitarian development organization to ITU today, no matter what the mandate of an organization is, that organization has to share personal data, whether it is to provide health insurance to the organization's employees, pension fund, whether it is collaborating in investigations, for example, or simple things such as hiring a vendor for organizing, managing a conference. So we are going to be sharing personal data. And the challenge is there. I'm going to maybe briefly disagree with Sarah on this point on the legal framework. I'm going to say that the fragmentation of today's legal framework is a big challenge. I'm not talking so much maybe about the interest sharing within IOs or within the UN system, but sharing with entities outside that bubble, the fragmentation of the legal framework, as well as the jurisdictional complexity of the status of an IO is very challenging. It is very challenging to explain the status of an international organization to entities that are not familiar with that status. And in terms of the different legal frameworks, I would say that even within the UN system, from my personal experience, having reviewed far too many compared to what I would have liked data sharing agreements. I have seen one UN agency trying to impose their regime to another UN agency, which you would think that within that space we shouldn't be doing that. However, often we can be quite narrow-minded when we think that our own system, our own regime is better than anyone else's. So this imposition, which maybe comes from what we have seen from national and regional frameworks, where often data sharing is based on whether there is adequate protection provided by the organization receiving data, which is guaranteed under EMA in a way if that organization follows the same regime. So this is one first challenge that to me is still remaining and it's still very much out there. Secondly, in terms of what are we able to do internally? Sarah mentioned also training and templates for solutions. It is very challenging to have resources to develop templates and run trainings, or in overall to have awareness raising activities. I would say that lack of resources, which we might be seeing more and more due to the more recent funding cuts, is a big challenge. It is very challenging to be able to have the senior management buy-in, in lack of a better word, on data protection. I do agree with David that we've seen the discussion around protection of personal data maybe grow the past years. I hope it will keep growing, and that nowadays we will keep moving forward instead of because of the current financial situation, taking out of the equation protection of personal data, because sometimes this is one area that organizations internally at least are deprioritizing. A last and a challenge I would like to mention that links to what Diana said earlier about trust is not only building trust, but also maintaining it. How do we do this, and how do we do this among organizations in terms of data sharing? How do we do this with data subjects? And among organizations, what happens when we have data breaches? How is that trust suddenly lost? And how can we fix this? What is the best way? And I know there are organizations around the room that have faced data breaches. I don't know if they're going to talk about them, but what is the best way of dealing with them in order to maintain that trust? So concluding maybe to say that, again, highlight the data sharing is a necessity. So the focus maybe should not be so much on the legal technical solutions, but more on remembering that at the core of this discussion is a human being, is the protection of data of an individual. When we talk about protecting data, it's about protecting people. So keeping this in mind, no matter what solutions we find around the multiple challenges we have. I'll stop at that.
Thank you, Christina. A lot of great points. And I like what you said with respect to we can't avoid sharing data. We just need to figure out how do we do it in the right way. And I cannot agree more. So with that, I would like to go to my other colleague for many years that I had a pleasure to work with, including on the HLCM principles by David. To Mark Schachter, who is the Senior Legal Officer at UNHCR. Mark,
thank you. So I want to start by just building on recognizing the good point made by Christina, that data sharing agreements are between two organizations, but it's about something that belongs to, or that is a person that gives rise to personal rights and personhood by a third party, so personal data, and that's actually the very difficult thing about data sharing agreements, but also I think the interesting and on this day I think something to keep in mind. I'm a senior legal officer at UNHCR. UNHCR, I'm just going to quickly, as a factual predicate, kind of echo I think what Sarah said. We're in a very close infrastructure milieu of cooperating relationships where data sharing is essential, where it's not an option in order for us to be able to provide assistance, to provide protection, to provide possible solutions refugees and other displaced people, we need to be able to collect data, analyze data of those individuals, and work together with partners and other entities in order to develop those operations. I'm going to spend the couple minutes I have, I think, maybe with a bit of a narrow focus, but then try to make a very obvious but larger point. The narrow focus is, as a lawyer, I do think a lot about agreements. On the operational side, the technical side, others are much more expert than me. And I have over time, over the journey of 10 or so years of working in data protection and data-related agreements, seen some movements that have happened in UNHCR. I think we've gotten much better at our capacities to do data sharing. And I would like to say that a critical reason for that is I think that we've developed, our leadership has supported the development of a strong policy, a strong framework and operational infrastructure, experts, and a network of data protection operations that allow us to implement those policies and those standards. Of course, that is all under challenge right now. So all that has to be said with a bit of a backward-looking, nostalgic look, perhaps. But my hope is it will continue. I think that over time, since 2016, as David mentioned, the UN principles came into effect. Over time, since then, and with UNHCR over that time, I think developing a couple of key policy documents and developing that infrastructure, I think data sharing at a certain level, from an agreement point of view, has become easier. And I think the reason for that is because of the strong infrastructure that we have. So I would say that the challenge of data sharing is in part an inward-looking challenge to make sure that internal structures are there to be able to properly deal with, to have the safeguards, to have the analyses, to be able to allow for data sharing to occur. And I would then just mention Diana's word about trust. I mean, I think that when you have that in existence, I think trust from the other side, it can be placed in UNHCR as a data partner, and that is actually something that's in our policy. A couple of things I want to mention, just getting again into a little more the nitty-gritty detail. I mean, I just want to mention that the UN Secretariat Bulletin on Data Protection and the UNHCR policy each have as part of their requirements that the sharing with third parties needs to be based on arrangements that afford adequate level of protection of the personal data being shared. So that's the kind of baseline. It's obvious, but it's still important to recall that. So in order to have that adequacy, there are lots of ways to figure that out. But the adequacy will have to, have as its touchstones all the key data protection principles and standards that were in the UN statement from 2016, and I think are reflect international standards at this point. So just quickly, fair and legitimate processing, purpose specification, data minimization, transparency, retention limits, et cetera, and also not just et cetera, data subject rights and the capacity for the data subjects to be able to bring complaints and have those responded to. So how does that get back into the question of data sharing agreements, and not data sharing itself, but the agreements, which is something that I work on. My experience is that in the past, and I'm probably guilty of this, we've spent a little bit too much time. I've spent a little bit too much time replicating a data protection framework within the agreement. And I'm not sure that that's always a good thing to do in order to enable and facilitate data sharing. And I would say the very simple and obvious insight, is that when you have the stronger data protection framework, you can simply refer to that in your agreement. And it becomes much more a question of, as I think Sarah was pointing out, of the operational issues, the issues about, do we share here? And not so much about what is the legal framework that we're trying to come up between two parties, and again, between two parties in a very limited fashion about a particular set of data subjects, but a particular type of data, perhaps in a particular country with a particular operation. So everything then is embedded, I think, in a stronger data protection framework. I'll stop there. That's the basic insight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And it's very interesting and insightful to hear it from coming from the legal experts that data sharing agreements is no longer the main issue or the main challenge, and we need to think about operations and operational impacts. So I will come back to you. Hopefully, we'll have a little bit of more time. But with that, I would like to pass on the floor to my colleague from the UN Office of High Commissioner of Human Rights in Leon Hong, and to speak a little bit about data sharing in the context of human rights, very specifically. So, Leon, on to you. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mila. As initially mentioned, my role in OHCHR is supporting investigative bodies. Commonly, you might recall Commission of Inquiries and Fact-Finding Mission, sometimes also High Commission of OHCHR also initiating certain investigations, such as Bangladesh in last year. So from inside of OHCHR, we have a human rights inquiry branch that supports all these investigative bodies. And my role within this human rights inquiry branch is supporting digital data-related handling from the identification, collection, processing, preservation, and also sharing. And because it is more supporting role, we can also talk about what is the role of or what is the mandate of investigative bodies. And most of our investigative bodies recently established include in their mandate collection of potential evidence. It is not only factual identification of what happened in relating to human rights conflict, but also relating to supporting judicial entities at the national and international level. So meaning it goes beyond the lifespan of investigation teams, and meaning it has to be shared if it is relevant and necessary and appropriate. So it starts with mind of sharing already from the very beginning. Okay. And then when we are talking about the information that is being collected and processed and preserved and shared within the context of investigation is very specialized. As you can imagine, it's very, very sensitive information that includes personal information. It can be victim, witnesses, and also potentially perpetrators too. And most of our investigations are operating in a very sensitive environment in terms of cybersecurity too. So all including this, there are a lot of challenges. First challenge when we are thinking about the collecting of information, there should be a legal basis or basis that should be legitimately, providing the ground, meaning it has to be most of our investigations, we do not have the judicial authority like a law enforcement, meaning we have to base on either open source data collection or consent-based receiving of information. So there is a protocol already set very rigorously, and we always collect this throughout all the process. But still, sometimes it is difficult to obtain consent, and there are limitations that we cannot actually freely share the information further to the investigation's scope. Then limit ourselves when it comes to the sharing. And second challenge is data integrity. When we are talking about collecting data from multiple sources, I'm more or less talking about it can be individual witness and also anybody like a journalist as an individual, also civil society organizations that we cooperate together, and also other UN entities that has collected information widely. So when we are collecting this information, as you can imagine, now with deepfake and the AI generated this information is massive, right? And the reliability, credibility of information investigation is the main. Without verifying the information properly, of course, it jeopardizes the trust to the investigation. So that is a big challenge nowadays. How we can trust data collected from different sources, and the volume is massive, and the resource Yeah, multiple times, other panel members mentioned the resource issue and expertise issue, because when we are talking about resource, not only resource, but also infrastructure. We always struggle with financial problems, not enough funding in this part. So how we can actually handle all this process enoughly support the protection of data and processing it efficiently. And another, it has been also highlighted several times, cybersecurity issue cannot be forgotten from the very beginning until the end. So how we can actually maintain our cybersecurity properly with which level of education and who can assess actually security issues when they are operating. And the last piece is coordination. When we are collecting information, especially when the volume is really high, if the data is not properly, tightly provided, digesting it, analyzing it, and using our investigation becomes a very, very heavy job. So coordination, it becomes really important in terms of utilizing the information, not only relying on the credibility of the information and sharing further. So overall, these are all the challenges. Out of all these challenges, I think based on these panel members and other participants, I think I would emphasize coordination, collaboration would be the most important thing, and probably something we can improve the most. Yeah, I finish. Yeah, I hope I was on time.
Thank you very much, Diane, and thank you for giving kind of the gist of your work and work of the investigations on human rights. I think it is very relevant also to the conversations on data protection, because it is highly sensitive data, and also, of course, bringing up the coordination aspect. How do we actually utilize the data, as well as the source issues? Thank you. I will then like to pass the floor to our online participants and speakers. In a way, I would like to conduct our roundtable as we have the main presenters, and then we also have colleagues and experts that are joining today's roundtable to also share their perspectives, and primarily now highlight in response to our introductory remarks, the challenges and the solutions that they've discovered as part of their experiences on data sharing. Before I pass on to our online speakers, we also had Massimo Marelli, who joined us from the ICRC, who is the Chief Data Protection and Privacy Officer. And Massimo ran a little bit late, so he did not have a chance to introduce himself. So Massimo, would you please be so kind to introduce yourself briefly? And then I would like to ask you to give a little bit of kind of overview of your challenges at ICRC, as well as potential solutions that you've witnessed or hope become available in the future to enhance data sharing.
Thank you, Mila. Thanks for having me. Apologies for the late arrival and the slight disruption. I hope it was not too disruptive. You kind of already introduced me, so maybe I'll go straight to the point. And because we've heard already quite a few interventions from esteemed colleagues that I've been working with for quite some time, I wouldn't want to repeat many of the things that have been said. I think I agree with many of the things that were said. I just want to perhaps give a bit of a provocative reaction to liven up a little bit the discussion. Maybe to provoke a little bit the discussion and the reaction, I would say, if data sharing was absolutely always the right thing to do and it was an easy thing to do, we would be doing a lot more of it already. The thing is that it's very complicated. It's very complicated for different reasons. Some of them, and this is where also perhaps in the language, I would not say obstacles in data sharing, because some are obstacles, but there are some also reasons. Some may be bad reasons, and we need to map them properly so that we can tackle them. Some may be right reasons or good reasons why we share. And I would agree that all organizations at some point, in some circumstances, share data. All of them do, but not in all cases and not at all times. And I can provide a few examples where some reasons may exist linked with perhaps friction or differences in mandates. Mandates of international organizations come with certain tasks and expectations, both from states that organizations will work in a particular way, but also from people people that entrust the organization with data, they will expect that the organization will be doing certain things in a particular way. So I mean, maybe I won't go into long examples, but I can provide a couple later on. But there might be situations where that friction makes it particularly challenging to share data. Data that has been collected initially for some particular reasons, it gets handed over and used for other reasons that are not compatible with those. So in a way, that's where proper frameworks and agreements between organizations are very important. And they take a long time to negotiate. And we, for a long time, have unfortunately been trying to reinvent the wheel every time that we had to share data. That has been a problem that we had in our field operations on the ground. We were reinventing the wheel every time that we had to exchange data, asking ourselves the same question. So it was a very helpful and positive development that at some point with some key partners that we work a lot with and that we want to be able to work even closer with, we sat down and we tried to see how we could navigate those frictions, those challenges, and established framework agreements in which we highlighted how in our dealing with each other, we would understand in a common way the principles of data protection, so that should our colleagues on the ground establish that in a particular case it is necessary and opportune to share data, we would know what applies and it can be done in a much faster way. Even doing that once, however, it takes time. It takes time and it takes a political and an institutional engagement. There has to be a willingness, and that is something that is challenging also. Organizations have different priorities, different timelines, and so on. So we need to, if we want to be able to increase the capacity of the humanitarian sector to share data, we need to have it as a clear priority of the humanitarian sector to tackle those questions and to sit down together to develop frameworks that allow for this. And that's not always be the case. Maybe another element to highlight is in the exchange of data from, we've been talking a lot about different international organizations working with each other, but there's also the question about sharing data with NGOs, non-governmental organizations. And the challenge of privileges and immunities is an important one because privileges and immunities can be a way that safeguards the exclusive purposes that are for the use of the data of that humanitarian organization. The moment that they're given out, there's no jurisdictional protection that prevents surveillance or prevents other uses that are authorized in the law, but that may not be compatible with the specific purposes of the international organization. But I think apart from the P&I question, I think it's also relevant to think about the challenges for NGOs to share data with international organizations, where organizations are increasingly regulated under the fragmentation has been mentioned. That's an important one. The lack of clarity, perhaps, over the interpretation of the permissibility of transfers to international organization has been an obstacle in the past. And I think that's another area where we can also work to sensitize states over necessary common interpretations of domestic legislation concepts like public interest, derogations, and so on.
Thank you, Massimo, and thanks for the message. Also, I feel like in the data protection work, we always talk about the privileges and immunities and legal frameworks, and yet today we have not yet brought light to that. So I really appreciate that you also bring in that dimension of acknowledging that we need to think about the national regimes and how we work with the national authorities, because after all, partners that international organizations work with are covered by those national regimes, and it is still a challenge. So thank you very much for that. With this, I would like to now go to our online presenters and I would say speakers. And I would like to pass on the floor to Caitlin from International Association of Privacy Professionals. Worked for many years with IAPP. And now, Caitlin, on to you to talk a little bit more about data protection, incentives, and overall work in the data sharing space and how what IAPP has witnessed through multiple forums that you've been organizing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I do think that like our last speaker, my remarks will build on so much of what has already been said. And I wanted to touch on 3 themes in particular, and that is why I really think this is an opportune moment for new initiatives on data sharing. Some of the models that we are seeing in terms of the path forward that you could take here, and then just touching at the end on a cautionary tale and building on the remarks that others have made around the importance of trust. So first, why is this an opportune moment? I think what we are seeing at the IAPP is that right now, organizations, companies, and governments are absolutely restructuring their governance models and taking a much more holistic approach to digital governance. So our survey data showed that in 2024, 80% of privacy teams added something beyond privacy to their plates. And in 2025, a majority of digital governance programs included privacy, AI governance, data governance, cybersecurity law, and other domains. And why do I mention that in this context? I think it's because it offers an opportunity to leverage some of the tools and templates for efficiency in meeting the compliance requirements that I know can be a real bear in this realm. Another change that we see occurring right now is an easing of data transfer restrictions. And that might seem a little counterintuitive. There are dozens of, as we've already heard, dozens of data transfer rules and restrictions around the globe. But just this year, we saw a court decision out of the EU in the Latome case that took a much broader understanding of what essential equivalence is, and I think opened up the idea that there can be additional models rather than the more restrictive interpretations of adequacy that we've seen in the past. Mirroring that for organizations, we have seen data transfer challenges go from the top priority faced by private sector organizations in 2022 to having only last year 12% of organizations indicate that this is a top 5 challenge for them. So there is an easing of the operational burdens that I think creates a pathway of opportunity here. The last thing is just kind of the mood we are seeing spurred by AI, of one of innovation and opportunity. Of course, we saw the Draghi report out of the EU, and we saw the simplification push via the EU omnibus. Here to our mind, this creates an opportunity for initiatives and an opening for initiatives like yours. So then in terms of models, what are we seeing out there? I'm sure that most or all of you in the room are familiar with the types of memorandum of understanding that have long existed between privacy commissions around the world, the US Federal Trade Commission, their international counterparts in Europe and elsewhere for information sharing. Because those are baked in privacy, I think those offer a useful model, but we've seen a new one emerge in the past few years that I think is worth looking at, and that is the digital governance cooperation fora that are being stood up across jurisdictions and within jurisdictions. The UK, Canada, the Netherlands, Ireland, and Australia have all stood up digital cooperation fora within their jurisdictions, such that the different regulators who are touching data governance and digital governance are coming together to create guidance, to sign memorandums of understanding, to address these kind of competing compliance burdens as you look at topics like data sharing. The last thing that I wanted to mention really kind of builds on the idea of the need for trust that so many people have spoken about. I think the the intense focus right now on AI, and as we all know, the intense need for data to fuel and train AI has created a real distrust and sense of skepticism about data sharing and the idea that data is being shared without permission, without control of the original owners, whether that is organizations or individuals. And there is a clear recognition of the value and power of data, including the power of data to control, which is undoubtedly critical in your sphere. And so remembering the importance of trust there is critical. And I think the United States, unfortunately, provides an example or a cautionary tale. As some of you may know, at the start of this US administration, there was a big push to initiate broad data sharing across US federal agencies without necessarily having a clearly defined or well-articulated and transparent purpose for that sharing. That created a tremendous amount of public concern about what purposes that data would be put to. And so I think it is just one other indicator about the importance of transparent, trustworthy path and the protections that you were all talking about at the outset. From where I sit, that means that all of you, the professionals steering privacy within your organizations, have to be the first stop. And so whatever we at the IAPP can do, I know resources has come up. We have a lot of free resources, templates, tools, trackers that you can use, but then whatever efforts you can inculcate within your organizations to make clear that you should be the first stop and have a seat at the table as these initiatives are in the earliest stages before the crisis hits to plan, as has been discussed, is critical. So I'll stop there, but thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Caitlin, and for such targeted and very concise remarks. I would like to maybe, because we're, again, we're trying to give as much time as possible for the questions. Before I proceed to the next speakers, I would like to say that we also have a few questions online, and I'll pass on to my colleague Koenish to perhaps cover 2 questions and read them out from the online participants, and then our next speakers that will be online, Alex, Maxa, and Jos, and also Giovanna in the room, could cover in their speeches those answers to those questions.
Sure. Here's a question from India. He's asking, how do we ensure that data sharing ecosystems do not reproduce existing power imbalances, especially when global South actors have limited influence in shaping governance frameworks?
Thank you, Koenish. And with those 2 questions, I would like to pass on the floor to Alex, who is the Data Protection Officer from UNHCR, and who will also respond and complement to what already been said from UNHCR colleague Mark. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mila, and indeed, I'm not going to reintroduce UNHCR, and a lot of good points were made by Mark and the other colleagues, but maybe a few things that I want to add or maybe challenge a bit. In UNHCR, Data Protection Office also is involved together with our colleagues from legal in the reviewing and clearing data protection agreements. So there is there's a very large experience in doing this for different kind of actors and all around the world on our side as well. And one thing that I think is very clear for us over the years that very often the challenges that are involved in this are indeed operational. I mean, the actual negotiations or the process of the clearing of the data protection agreement just reveals some issues that hadn't been addressed properly on the way to those negotiations, whether it comes to the understanding of the exact nature of the processing operation, of what actual data flows are involved, and having the common understanding of what is going to happen between the two parties. Or crucial risk assessments that had not been conducted before deciding to engage in the particular data processing. So very often, the request is for the clearance of the data sharing agreement, and the first question we would ask: have you conducted a data protection impact assessment for this great initiative that you are planning? And that's where the conversation proceeds. So that's why I think it's one needs to be careful about sort of when discussing the friction that is introduced in the data sharing processes by these negotiations on the DSA, because very often that exactly is a deliberate friction that needs to be there to ensure that the rights of the individuals are protected in the context of us as a community, and especially in humanitarian action, processing the personal data. Very often very sensitive personal data that can expose individuals to great risks. Nevertheless, I mean, there are also challenges on the legal side that do exist. I mean, I want to push a bit against the idea that sort of all the actors, all the UN agencies in particular in this sphere sort of are have equally valid approaches to the data protection. I mean, I do not think that is the case. I mean, we do have sort of common ground when it comes to HLCP principles, but HLCP principles alone are not a complete data protection framework. There is substantial differences between the data protection frameworks of different UN agencies, and there is even further difference between the level of implementation of those frameworks, or whether data protection offices even exist, basically, or any equivalent mechanisms, let alone the mechanisms for properly addressing, for example, data subject complaints or redress requests. And I'm not saying that UNHCR is necessarily the best in this. So as we negotiate this common framework, this agreements, hopefully. And when they are made, and when, for instance, we negotiated these global agreements that Massimo has mentioned, and colleagues from World Bank, with our main partners, with whom we exchange a lot of data, and who also have quite developed frameworks. Very often we need to make sure that essentially any common the standard for data sharing is not a race to the bottom, but rather a race to the top. That through this agreement we do raise the plank for the standards of the protection of the individuals whose data that we are entrusted with. Thank you.
Here, right, the different perspectives within the room, where some say that the legal challenges are not the key ones, and again, the national regimes is also another challenge. And then you bring back the point that yes, we still need to be working on some of the legal challenges in addition to the operational needs and the tools and procedures to enhance our data sharing cooperation. With that, I would like to now go to Jos, because it brings in different interesting perspective of actually cooperating together on a common instrument for data sharing. And Jos, maybe you could say a few words and updates regarding that at the UN.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Mila, and thank you, colleagues, for the very rich contribution so far. In the in the spirit of a roundtable, I will touch on some of those contributions. Just to say again, I work with OCHA, which is the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs of the Secretariat. And as Sarah and Il Young and others have mentioned, that coordination mandate now really means coordination of data and coordination of data sharing specifically. And so even though OCHA does not run any large-scale registration exercises or manages a lot of beneficiary data like IOM or UNHCR or ICRC, we have a coordination role around data sharing. And that's also the challenge that I'll talk about is data sharing specifically in humanitarian operations. So in humanitarian response, the humanitarian system conducts exercises called operational peer reviews and interagency humanitarian evaluations. And over the last couple of years, those reviews, including for Somalia and for Ethiopia and Afghanistan, have really shown that a lack of data sharing, and specifically beneficiary data sharing, has led to very significant delays in the provision of urgently needed and life-saving assistance. So Christina, I think, was also mentioning that data sharing is not a choice or an option. It's critical to the work that we do, and that's also surfaced by these evaluations. So based on the evaluations, the Emergency Directors Group under the Interagency Standing Committee, the IASC, tasked OCHA to develop a template data sharing agreement, starting with a UN to UN template, and then that will be followed by a UN to non-UN data sharing agreement template. And Massimo, I think, was mentioning the sort of the political will that needs to be there to improve data sharing in the humanitarian system, at least within the EDG. I think it's now clear that that will is there. So we've developed a draft of that data sharing agreement template together with the Secretariat Office of Legal Affairs. It's gone for a first round of review among the UN entities represented on the EDG. There's 10 of them. And that feedback has been taken forward by the Office of Legal Affairs, and it's now, it will be recirculated. So it's back with our EDG chair, Adam, who will recirculate it among the EDG. And what that template does, there's 3 key sections. One is instructions for staff on how to approach establishing a data sharing agreement. And those instructions cover some of the points that were mentioned in the discussion today, including doing a risk assessment, being very clear about the purpose of data sharing, the compatibility of that purpose with the original purpose of data collection. So all of those points are covered in the instructions. Then there's the actual legal body of the agreement. And I heard some of the colleagues say that basically the data protection frameworks are not the issue. I can say from the comments that we received from the different UN entities, there's at least different opinions about what that body of the text should look like. So there's the instructions, the body of the text, and then an annex. And the annex is maybe the key piece here, because that's where the parties using this template fill out exactly what data will be shared, why that is needed to meet the specified purpose, the data protection, data security measures that will be taken in the data sharing arrangements. So all of that is defined in the annex to the template. The template is grounded in the CEB principles, and it is based on an acknowledgement among these UN partners of each other's data protection framework. So Mark was mentioning that we should not try and recreate data protection frameworks in our agreements, and the template that we're developing is in line with that approach. So we acknowledge the data protection frameworks of the parties, and then set out the technical details for the specific data transfers. I think I will leave it at that. Back over to you, Mila.
Thank you very much, Jos. Given that we have a little bit of more time left, and we have also Giovanna from ILO and Maxta from UNOICT kind of giving us a little bit of a more technical perspective, I wanted to just open the floor before I proceed to our two next colleagues. If there's any questions, maybe in the room or online, and then we could potentially cover them in our next respondents' remarks. Okay, so no online questions either, right?
No, here's no questions on the online.
Okay, wonderful. So with that, I would like to now pass on the floor to Mahsa from UNOICT to talk about maybe about more of a technical side of data sharing.
Thank you so much. Really amazing speakers here. So much to take away. So I work in OICT. So for those who are not in the UN system, that's like the technology office department of the UN Secretariat. And we were, with many colleagues here in the room, we were involved in drafting and finalizing a data strategy for the UN system in 2020. And in that strategy, which is, I think, would be interesting for everyone who hasn't seen it, it says all data should be shared unless there's a good reason it shouldn't be. And there's another organization that says that as well, which is Amazon. And they actually practice that. And I think it explains a lot about why they do so well as a company. Now, why is it that we don't? So that's why we needed the strategy. We have policies. We have a policy on information sharing in the UN that says that exactly that all data should be shared, but we saw that that's not happening in practice. So with this strategy, the technology department was responsible for trying to operationalize and bring in the technologies necessary to bring a lot of what was said in that strategy to life. And we did a lot of work as part of mapping out what to do. But one of the things we realized in the recent years is that one of the main reasons we can bring that strategy to life is because there aren't tools in place to actually help with things like data sharing. So we worked with some consultancies to try to figure out what exactly is missing. And two things came out. One is the need for, some people talked about it, the operational tools, the technology tools to make sure that there's that exchange taking place within the Secretariat. And we have colleagues working on that. But interestingly, we're still seeing resistance. So what it's showing us is that even if you introduce a technology, you tell offices, okay, here is a place where you can catalog your data and tell other parts of the organization that this is what you have, and this is what technically we should be sharing with each other, unless it's classified. We are still seeing that there isn't that appetite to come on board with the initiative. So one of the things we've trying to develop now is a data strategy template, data sharing template to build that trust that some of you talked about. So we're in this space, we're in this time to, at the moment, drafting that, and I think we'll be reaching out to some of the colleagues here to get some experience on your work in that space. But we are seeing that even if you have the operations, it is challenging. So I'll stop here in the interest of time, but if there's any questions, happy to answer. Thank you.
And yours, same as well to you. With that, we have 3 more minutes left, and I would like to potentially kind of give the floor to Giovanna to give sort of an overview from her ILO perspective, but also think of what should our international organizational stop doing and start doing when it comes to data partnerships and data sharing. And after that, I will give about 30 seconds to each one of those present in the room to give kind of final, to pick one final solution that you think we should all do in order to enhance our data sharing in a trustworthy way and data protection way.
Thank you, Mila, for this opportunity to speak to share with the colleagues online. One thing that is very unique to the ILO is that we're a tripartite organization, the only one in the UN system. We work with employers, governments, and workers. That means that the ILO has produced guidelines for the protection of workers' personal data. I mentioned that because it's an important tool that we've discussed today, not only working in the development cooperation sphere. So when we're looking at what we need to do well and good is continue having dialogues like this, sharing information about how we're doing, what works well, and what does not work well. Because with the increased capacity constraints and financial constraints that we have to look to each other and we have to unify the way we're treating data. Data governance is really, again, the holistic way of looking at things, and that will help us to reduce those transaction costs. With the ILO, we have challenges, and one of the things I'll be doing after this meeting is approaching David, because one of the areas that we have issues around is not so much with data sharing agreements with IOs to IOs or with our constituents, because we have longstanding arrangements with governments on how to get information for statistical purposes for labor conditions. But it's also when you're looking at the new partnerships, that private sector, civil society, and sharing information there and how to work with them. Because although we've prepared FAQs to address these challenges, what the ILO is and how it works, dealing with confidentiality and data protection, there's still a gap there. So what we are doing well is these types of meetings, these types of forum. What we need to look at is to replicate, to stop the fragmentation, because that, as we've mentioned in different areas, increases the cost of doing business for each of us, and we're not learning from the best practices from each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Giovanna. Very well said. And with that, I would like to also highlight some of the remarks that were made by the High Commissioner this morning at the opening of the event and the summit today. Without safeguards, today's innovative technologies can deepen inequality, silence communities, and entrench harm. And I would say that within our context of data sharing, well, data must enable protection of human rights. It is great to see that we're all together in the room today. We continue this conversation. And actually, almost exactly 6 years ago, we met here at Paulette Wilson with many of you who are together, talking about the HLCM principles as a guiding framework for the United Nations. And we also talked about AI and data governance. And in fact, 6 years ago, the topic was data governance and how do we establish cooperation amongst ourselves. So let's continue that, Giovanna. Thank you for that call. I would like to pass on to now Massimo, Mark, David, Diana, and my other colleagues on the left to say take 15 seconds to kind of say what is your core message and what we must do to achieve human rights protective data sharing to enable human rights. Massimo.
All right, so I think also perhaps to pick up on the question that was asked earlier about imposing frameworks and so on, I think the gist that I would like to pass is perhaps data protection agreements for me are not an administrative hurdle or something that you just throw a template and you fix everything. Data protection agreements are a moment of accountability to the people that entrust with the data, and a moment in which the organizations agree how they cooperate with each other, keeping the persons for which the sharing is happening at the center.
Thank you. Mark?
I want to just quickly supplement what I said because I've heard some references to it. So I'm trying to make what I try to do is make a correlation between a strong data protection framework and operational capacities and an ease of contracting, where that predicate of strong data protection frameworks and operationalism doesn't exist, then I think contracting becomes much more difficult and the data sharing becomes much more difficult. So I wasn't exactly saying that legal agreements is not the problem. Legal agreements will become the problem when that strong data protection framework and underlying capacities are not there. I think we're in a bit of a dangerous area. I think we're in a good spot compared to 10 years ago. I think we're in a dangerous area going forward. And I'm not sure that the only focus should be on templates. It should also be on the capacity to be able to fill out those templates in ways that the organizations trust each other, can interact with each other, and serve the ultimate purposes of these agreements as described by many.
Thank you. Very well said. Thanks, Mark. And David?
Two things very quickly. One, I would support what Massimo just said. And secondly, I would echo the comments made this morning about the impact of AI on this whole discussion. I don't think we know exactly yet what that could mean, but I think we know it's an issue that we need to continue to pay attention to.
Thank you. Diana?
I think the only thing that I would say is that these spaces are absolutely essential, because without these spaces and facing each other, seeing each other in the eyes, that trust does not happen. And to the issues of financing and not being able to deliver for the missions that all of your organizations are looking for, please refer to the private sector, because it's there. Please use this as an example in a way of saying the private sector is already investing because the threats are this. And I mean, we do not handle the hard things that you are handling today, but please use this as an example to invest and not allow data protection to be thrown under the bus.
Thank you, Diana. Sarah?
I think what I'm going to say will sound incredibly obvious, but I mean, it is a challenge. And that is that I think what's important is that any data sharing be deliberate. That is, if you need to share information in the humanitarian sector for the purposes of providing humanitarian assistance, you have assessed the risk, you've put the it's beneficiary focused sharing. There should not be anything that gets in your way. Contracts shouldn't get in your way. If you have the operational SOPs set out, there really shouldn't be, but it has to be deliberate. I think the issue is when it is just kind of a side note, or it's convenient, or so really, I mean, it sounds obvious, but it really has to be well thought out. And if it is, there should be no obstacles to it, at least within the humanitarian sector.
Thank you, Sarah. Ina?
I'm trying to answer in my head the question, how can we share personal data while putting the individual at the center of data sharing? And I come up just right now with a type of a Poirot murder mystery type of answer. It's like, it's not you, but it's made you, or it is you. So I think that it's not the legal agreement, and I say this as a lawyer, it hurts my heart, but even if you have drafted a beautiful data sharing agreement and everything is there, everything that should be there is there, then you do get asked the question, but how do you know that that entity you share data with is not going to onward share it, even though you've prohibited it clearly in the agreement? Are you even checking that this is not happening? And then you would have people from the technical side, so the second, let's say, suspect, being like, oh, but we can put technical measures in place. That's the only way to ensure, for example, that onward data sharing doesn't take place. And then from the technical side, even if such measures are possible, I would think, but what happens then to the trust between the agencies that are sharing personal data? So I would say, again, coming back to a more maybe banal answer, which is collaboration, because the final aim should be that the entity you're sharing data with does not want to share further. It should be something that comes more from within their core rather than the legal obligation or the technical prohibition, which is good to have there, and we should have it there, but it should be further than that.
Thank you, Christina. And final words to Leon.
Yeah, I would like to end my word emphasizing the collaboration and cooperation again, because it's not only about data sharing, actually it goes much further, and it boils down to resource too, because if we think of utility of the data sharing, and it has to happen from the very beginning, from the collection, from the one who is collecting and the later sharing with another entity. And that can make sure the credibility of the information and the interoperability of the information later when it's utilized by another organization. So we don't focus on only the data sharing part, but overall, pipeline. And to do that, we would need to meet more. We need to talk more, and probably can build a solution together.
Thank you. With that, I would like to conclude this session. I'm grateful for all of you joining today in person and online. specific thanks to David coming from Washington, D.C. Thank you, David. And thank you for speakers staying with us online a little bit past the timeline. And I would like to all invite you to the Lightning Talks Round 2 in our plenary room downstairs, which is on embracing new behaviors, innovation, digital, and the quintet of change. Hopefully we'll see you there. And thank you again.